The elder's words hung in the damp air like a death sentence. "It is poison, a curse upon our bloodline. Touch it and your skin will melt. Take it to the Great Canyon. Throw it into the abyss. The spirits will claim it." David nodded slowly, his weathered face betraying nothing. He did not ask, "What is it?" Questions were a luxury for those who could afford to care. He simply took his payment, a small pouch of rare salt and a bundle of quality arrowheads, materials worth more than gold in this unforgiving world. Three elders sat in the shadows of the ceremonial hut, their elongated blue faces grave and inscrutable. In the corner lay a sack made from river reptile hide, bound tight with sinew. The sack moved slightly, and from within came a muffled whimpering sound. David stepped out of the elder's hut into the gray light of morning. The settlement sprawled across massive tree roots that twisted through the earth like the fingers of buried giants. Fog crept along the ground, swallowing the lower huts. This was a grim place built by a grim people who had learned to survive in a world that wanted them dead. David was 40 years old and looked older. His body was a map of violence, scarred and weathered by years of taking jobs no one else would touch. He stood tall, his frame lean but powerful, dressed in worn leather armor that had saved his life more times than he could count. At his belt hung a heavy machete, forged from dark metal, its edge sharp enough to split bone. As he walked through the central square, the blue-skinned inhabitants melted into the shadows of their dwellings. They watched him with a mixture of revulsion and fear. Their elongated limbs gave them an unsettling appearance, like insects pretending to be people. He was an outsider here, a human in a settlement of aliens, but they needed him for the work their own kind would not do. David had entered the elder's hut without removing his boots, a deliberate insult that went unacknowledged. They needed him too much to complain. Now he stood in the square with the writhing sack, and the settlement's inhabitants pressed themselves against walls and peered from windows, making signs of warding with their six-fingered hands. David hoisted the sack onto his shoulder. It was heavy, at least 25 kilograms. The cargo inside began to thrash and struggle, but David simply adjusted the strap and kept walking. His footsteps were steady and purposeful as he left the settlement behind and entered the jungle. The vegetation here was wrong in ways that never stopped disturbing him, even after 5 years on this planet. The leaves were shades of blue and purple. The bark of trees had a crystalline quality that caught the light, and the air itself felt thick, almost liquid in the lungs. David moved with the economy of a man who knew how to conserve his strength. He had a long walk ahead of him, 3 days to the Great Canyon if the weather held and nothing tried to kill him. Hours passed. The sounds from the sack grew quieter, then stopped entirely. David's jaw tightened. They had paid him for an execution, not for delivering a corpse. Whatever was in the sack was supposed to be alive when it went into the abyss. The spirits, they said, would not accept a dead offering. As dusk painted the alien sky in shades of amber and violet, David made camp in a small clearing. He built a fire, small enough to provide light and warmth, but not so large as to attract unwanted attention. The jungle at night was full of things that hunted by the glow of flames. He sat on a fallen log and stared at the sack. The silence from within was complete and troubling. David pulled out his knife, a long blade with a bone handle worn smooth by his grip. He wrapped his hand in a rag, following the elder's warning about poison, about skin that would melt at contact. He cut the bindings carefully, ready to spring back if something venomous emerged. The sack fell open, and what spilled out onto the forest floor was not a monster. It was a child. The girl gasped for air like a drowning swimmer breaking the surface. She was soaked with sweat, her skin pale even by the standards of her blue-skinned people. She could not have been more than 8 years old. Her eyes, wide with terror, fixed on David's face. She scrambled backward on hands and knees until her back hit a tree, then curled into a ball, covering her head with her thin arms, waiting for the blow that would end her life. David stood frozen. He had expected a creature, a mutant, some biological weapon the elders wanted disposed of. But this was a child. Just a child. He looked down at his knife. The blade was clean. No acid, no toxin eating at the metal. His wrapped hands showed no signs of burning or blistering. He waited, watching her. She did not move, did not lower her arms. Her small body shook with silent sobs. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a night predator screamed its hunting cry. Dawn came slowly to the jungle, light filtering through the canopy in dusty shafts. Emina sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes fixed on nothing. She had not slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of her people, the ones who had shoved her into the sack, who had sealed her in darkness and given her to the human killer. David approached her carefully. She flinched but did not run. There was nowhere to run. He moved slowly, deliberately, and extended his bare hand toward her. No glove, no protection. Amina squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the scream of pain when his flesh touched hers and began to dissolve. His finger brushed her cheek. His skin did not melt. It did not blister or burn. The touch was gentle, testing, and then gone. Amina's eyes flew open in shock. David studied his finger, turning it in the light. Nothing, just a touch, skin on skin, as normal as breathing. He reached into his pack and pulled out a water flask. He tossed it to her, and she fumbled the catch, nearly dropping it. Her hands shook as she twisted the cap open and drank, gulping the water down so fast she choked on it. Water ran down her chin and neck. She lowered the flask finally and looked at him with confusion and fear. David spoke quietly, more to himself than to her. Liars. The word hung between them. He understood now. This was not about poison or cursed blood. This was about elimination, about removing something inconvenient. The elders had lied to him, used him as their instrument of murder, and counted on his greed to make him complicit. He felt a cold anger building in his chest. David began packing his gear with quick, efficient movements. He would leave her here with the water and some food. She would have a chance at least, more than she would have had in the abyss. It was the best he could do. He owed her nothing. He owed no one anything. Then he paused. Behind them, perhaps half a kilometer back through the jungle, a flock of birds exploded into the sky in a panicked mass. David crouched and pressed his ear to the ground. Through the earth came the vibration of footsteps, multiple sets, moving in formation. Trackers. The elders had sent cleaners to follow him, to ensure he completed the job, and probably to eliminate the witness who could report what he had seen in that sack. David stood and looked at the girl. If he left her here, they would find her within hours and finish what the elders had started. If he took her with him, he would be breaking his contract, turning against the settlement, making himself a target. The smart choice was obvious. The smart choice was always obvious. He pulled out a length of cord and tied her wrists together in front of her, loose enough not to hurt, but tight enough that she could not slip free. It was a symbolic restraint, an excuse he could give if questioned. She looked up at him with those enormous eyes, and he saw the question in them. "Are you going to kill me after all?" "Move," he said gruffly, "and keep up." They reached the river by midday. It was wide and fast, the water a strange greenish blue that frothed white over rocks. The rope bridge that should have spanned it hung in tatters on the far side. Someone had cut it. Someone who knew the route David would take, who wanted to slow him down or trap him against the water. David cursed under his breath. They would have to ford it. The water was waist deep at best, chest deep at worst, and the current was strong enough to sweep a grown man off his feet if he was not careful. He looked at Amina. She barely came up to his chest. The water would be over her head. He waded in first, testing the bottom. The rocks were slick and uneven. Amina followed hesitantly, the water rising quickly up her small body. When it reached her chest, she tried to keep going, her bound hands held up above the surface. The current caught her, pulled her feet out from under her. She went under, her head striking a rock with a sickening crack. The current dragged her downstream. David dropped his pack and dove. The water was murky, full of sediment. He saw her tumbling past, a small blue shape rolling with the current. He lunged, caught her arm, pulled her against his chest. His feet found purchase on a large boulder, and he pushed upward, breaking the surface. She was limp in his arms, not breathing. He dragged her to the shore and laid her on the rocky bank. Water streamed from her mouth and nose. Her lips were already turning a darker shade of blue. David tilted her head back, sealed his mouth over hers, and blew air into her lungs. Her chest rose and fell with his breath. He pressed on her sternum, counting compressions, then breathed for her again. Once more. Again. Emina convulsed and coughed up river water in great heaving gas. She rolled onto her side, vomiting water and bile onto the rocks. David sat back on his heels, breathing hard. That had been close. Too close. He pulled out his knife. Emina's eyes widened, but instead of moving toward her throat, the blade moved to the cord binding her wrists. He cut it away in a single stroke. The cord fell into the water and was swept away downstream. "Hold on to my belt," he told her. His voice was rough but not unkind. "Don't let go." They found shelter that night in a small cave set into a cliff face. It was shallow but defensible, with only one entrance. David built no fire. They were too close to being caught. He could feel the cleaners closing in, could sense their presence the way a hunted animal senses the predator's approach. Emina huddled against the back wall, still shivering from the river crossing. David sat near the entrance, his machete across his knees, listening to the jungle night. The sounds were different here, deeper in the wilderness. Things moved in the darkness that he had never seen, creatures that made noises like screaming children or laughing madmen. The whistle was so soft he almost missed it. A breath of sound, nothing more. Then the dart struck the log beside his head with a solid thunk, its tip glistening with something that might have been poison or might have just been sap. David did not wait to find out. He shoved Emina deeper into the cave. "Down! Stay down!" 3 shadows detached from the darkness at the cave mouth. They moved like liquid, their blue skin making them nearly invisible in the night. Only the gleam of their weapons gave them away. David had his machete up, the blade catching starlight. He saw them clearly now, cleaners in their traditional gear, nearly naked except for weapon harnesses, their bodies painted with patterns that broke up their outlines. The first one came in fast with paired knives, slashing high and low in a scissor pattern. David stepped inside the attack, took a cut across his forearm that burned like fire, and brought his machete down in a brutal overhead chop. The blade caught the cleaner between neck and shoulder, cutting deep. The alien made a gurgling sound and collapsed. The second cleaner lunged with a spear. David twisted, felt the point scrape across his ribs, caught the spear shaft and used it to swing the cleaner around and into the cave wall. Bone cracked against stone. David ripped the spear free and drove it through the cleaner's chest, pinning him to the wall like an insect in a collection. The third cleaner was smarter. He stayed back, circling, looking for an opening. They faced each other in the narrow space, both breathing hard. David could feel blood running hot down his arm and side. The cuts were not deep, but they hurt like hell. The cleaner feinted left, then came in right with a long knife aimed at David's throat. David caught the wrist, turned it, felt the joint pop. The cleaner screamed. David used the momentum to throw him, and the alien's scream cut off abruptly as he tumbled over the cliff edge outside the cave. The sound of his body hitting the rocks below was distant and final. David stood in the entrance, gasping for breath. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the stone. His whole body ached. He was getting too old for this kind of work. Behind him, he heard Amina's ragged breathing. She had watched it all, had seen him kill 3 trained warriors in the space of heartbeats. He wondered if she was more frightened of him now than she had been before. "We need to move," he said without turning around. "Where there are 3, there are more. Get up. We run until dawn." They ran through the night, and the jungle seemed to know they were prey. Things crashed through the undergrowth around them, paralleling their path. Eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting what little light filtered down from the moons. David pushed them hard, knowing that stopping meant death. Emina kept up somehow, her small legs pumping, her breath coming in desperate gasps. When the sun finally rose, they were in an open area of broken ground, all sharp rocks and sparse vegetation. There was no cover here, no place to hide. David knew they had made a mistake. The cleaners would spot them easily in this terrain, but Emina was stumbling now, falling every few steps. He looked down and saw that her feet were torn and bleeding. She had been running barefoot over rocks that could cut leather. Blood left a trail behind her, bright blue against the gray stone. David stopped. Emina collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. She looked up at him with eyes that held no hope, only exhaustion. She expected him to leave her now. She had slowed him down, made him vulnerable. He should abandon her and save himself. That was the logical thing to do. David knelt in front of her. He pulled off his shirt and began tearing it into strips. Emina watched, confused, as he wrapped the cloth around her bleeding feet, binding them carefully, fashioning crude but functional boots. His hands were surprisingly gentle for their size. When he finished, he stood and offered her his hand. "Get up," he said. "We keep moving." For the first time, Emina did not look at him with fear. She looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust. The path narrowed as they climbed into the hills. The rocks here were strange, shot through with veins of crystal that hummed with a low frequency that made David's teeth ache. Emina seemed unbothered by it. Perhaps her people were used to it. Perhaps she was too exhausted to care. The attack came without warning. A shadow fell across them, and David looked up to see a creature leaping from the rocks above. A stone lion, the locals called them, though they were nothing like lions from Earth. This thing was twice the size of a man, covered in overlapping plates of chitinous armor, with a mouthful of teeth like broken glass. It hit Emina like a falling boulder, driving her to the ground. David reached for his machete, but he was too slow. The creature's jaws closed around Amina's forearm and bit down with crushing force. David heard the sound of teeth on metal. The creature jerked back, confused. One of its fangs had snapped off at the root. Emina's arm, where the creature had bitten, was now dark blue, almost black, and hard as granite. The skin had not broken. There was not even a bruise. The stone lion staggered back, shaking its head, blood streaming from its broken tooth. David stepped forward and drove his machete into the creature's throat, putting his full weight behind the blow. The blade cut through the softer tissue between armor plates. The creature made a choking sound and collapsed in a heap of bleeding flesh and shattered carapace. David stared at Emina's arm. As he watched, the dark coloration faded, and her skin returned to its normal light blue. She looked down at her arm in wonder, flexing her fingers. There was no wound, no mark at all. She had survived a bite that would have shattered bone and torn flesh, and she was completely unharmed. David understood. This was why the elders had called her poison. Not because she could harm others, but because she could not be harmed. In a society where strength meant control, where power came from the ability to inflict pain, a child who could turn her skin to stone was a threat. She was untouchable, and that made her dangerous. "You are not poison," David said quietly. "You are hard. They fear what they cannot hurt." That night, they made camp for the last time before reaching the canyon. David butchered the stone lion, roasting strips of its meat over a fire. The meat was tough but edible, and they were both starving. Emina ate silently, stealing glances at David across the flames. She seemed to be working up the courage to speak. "You will still throw me in?" she asked finally. Her voice was small, barely audible over the crackling fire. "They paid you." David did not answer immediately. He stared into the flames, his scarred face unreadable. The fire cast harsh shadows across his features, making him look ancient and tired. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. "I have done many things for money," he said, "things that should have killed my soul. I told myself it did not matter. They were aliens, strangers, not my people. Their deaths meant nothing." He paused, turning the meat on its spit. "But you are not a contract. You are a child, and I am not so far gone that I cannot see the difference." Emina said nothing. She did not know if his words meant mercy or merely a delay of execution. She curled up near the fire and closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Tomorrow they would reach the canyon. Tomorrow she would learn whether the human killer had a heart or just a conscience that spoke too late to matter. The great canyon revealed itself slowly as they climbed the final rise. First came the sound, a vast roaring like the breath of the world itself. Then the wind hit them, strong enough to stagger Emina. David steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, and they walked forward together to the edge. The canyon was not just large. It was impossible, a wound in the planet that seemed to have no bottom. David had seen it once before, years ago, and it still took his breath away. The chasm stretched from horizon to horizon, its walls dropping away into mists and shadows. Updrafts and downdrafts created whirlwinds that howled like tortured souls. He could see rock formations jutting from the mist like the bones of giants, And he knew that what he saw was only the beginning. The canyon went down for kilometers, maybe tens of kilometers. No one had ever reached the bottom and returned to tell of it. Emina stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared back. Her small body trembled in the wind. This was supposed to be her grave. Behind them, the jungle rustled and went silent. David's hand moved to his machete without conscious thought. They emerged from the trees in a semicircle. Cleaners, 10 of them this time. These were elite warriors, the best the settlement had. Their bodies were painted with death symbols, and their weapons were the finest the tribe possessed. At their head walked a figure in a mask made from a great predator's skull, ceremonial but no less deadly for it, the warlord of the Cleaners. David had heard of him, but never seen him. The warlord's reputation was built on the bodies of those who had opposed the Elder's will. The Cleaners stopped 20 meters away, fanning out to cut off any escape. The only way out was backward, into the canyon, into the abyss that swallowed all things and returned nothing. The warlord stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was amplified by the skull mask, turning it into something inhuman and terrible. "Human," the warlord said, the word heavy with contempt. "You have broken your contract. You have killed our warriors, but the elders are merciful. Complete the task. Throw the cursed one into the abyss. Do this, and you may keep your life. Refuse, and join her in the fall." David stood at the very edge of the precipice. One step back, and he would fall into emptiness. Emina stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the swirling mist below. Her shoulders shook, though whether from cold or fear, David could not tell. She turned to look at him, and he saw in her face the question she dared not ask aloud. "Will you kill me? After everything, will you throw me away to save yourself?" David looked down at her. His face was hard, weathered by years of violence and survival. The scars on his skin were a map of every compromise he had made, every choice to look away from horror because it was easier than fighting. He had told himself for years that he was just a man trying to survive in a universe that did not care if he lived or died. He had told himself that morality was a luxury for those who had never been truly desperate. He had been lying to himself. "Why are they doing this?" Emina screamed, her voice barely audible over the wind. "What is wrong with me?" She looked up at him with eyes that held the weight of every rejection, every moment of fear, every second she had spent locked in that sack waiting to die. She was 8 years old, and she had been sentenced to death for the crime of being different. David spoke quietly, but his words cut through the wind. "You are not guilty. They kill everyone who threatens them, but they do it quietly. But now you are my weapon." He placed his hand on the handle of his machete. The metal was warm from his body heat, familiar in his grip. He had killed so many things with this blade. Men, women, creatures that had no names. He had told himself each time that it was necessary, that it was survival. He had been wrong every time. David turned to face the Cleaners. His voice, when he shouted, was raw with fury. "The contract is canceled. The cargo stays with me." He grabbed Emina and pushed her behind a large boulder at the cliff's edge, the only cover available. "Stay here. Live." The Cleaners answered with a battle cry that seemed to shake the very ground. They charged as one, a wave of blue bodies and gleaming weapons. David met them with his machete raised and murder in his heart. This was not a duel. This was not combat. This was slaughter, pure and simple. David moved like a man possessed, his machete a blur of dark metal. He used his size, his reach, his rage. He cut through spear shafts like they were twigs, shattered knives with his blade, broke bones with his elbows and knees. Blood, blue and red, mixed together, painted the rocks. The edge of the canyon became his ally. When one Cleaner tried to flank him, David kicked low, sweeping the alien's legs. The Cleaner stumbled backward, arms windmilling, and fell screaming into the abyss. His cry echoed off the rocks and then faded into the wind, swallowed by distance. David took a spear thrust to his thigh. The point punched through muscle and scraped bone. He roared in pain but did not fall. He grabbed the spear shaft and pulled, dragging the wielder close enough to smash his face with the pommel of his machete. Bone crunched. The Cleaner collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. But there were too many. They surrounded him, forced him to one knee. Spears and knives came at him from every angle. He parried desperately, but a blade slipped through and cut deep across his ribs. He tasted blood in his mouth. His vision began to gray at the edges. He heard the warlord laughing behind his skull mask. Die, human. Die knowing you failed. Emina watched David fall, watched the cleaners close in for the kill. She was hidden behind the boulder, safe for the moment, but she knew that would not last. Once they killed David, they would come for her. They would throw her into the abyss, and no one would ever know what happened to the cursed child of the blue-skinned people. She remembered David's words. "You are my weapon." She did not fully understand what he meant, but she understood that he had chosen to fight for her. He had chosen to die for her, and she would not let him die alone. Emina stood up from behind the boulder. She saw the warlord raising his ceremonial axe for the killing blow. She ran. Her small legs pumped as fast as they could, her feet pounding the rocky ground. The warlord never saw her coming. She lowered her head and hit him in the solar plexus with the crown of her skull at full speed. In the instant of impact, her skin transformed. The flesh of her forehead became dark blue, then black, as hard as forged steel. The sound of the collision was like a hammer striking meat. The warlord's breath exploded from his lungs. He folded in half around the small body that had hit him like a cannonball. His mask cracked. Blood poured from his mouth. David saw his moment. He lurched to his feet, ignoring the fire in his leg inside. His hand shot out and grabbed a spear from one of the stunned cleaners. He spun and threw it in one smooth motion, putting everything he had left into the throw. The spear flew true. It punched through the warlord's chest and out his back, the point driving into the ground behind him. The warlord stood pinned like a specimen, his eyes wide with shock behind the cracked mask. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Then he was still. David stumbled to Amina's side. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his face pale beneath the grime and blood. But he was alive. Amina stood beside him, her skin slowly returning to normal. Where her forehead had struck the warlord, there was not even a bruise. She looked up at David, and he looked down at her, and in that moment, something passed between them that had no need of words. 5 cleaners remained. They stared at the body of their warlord, at the human who should have been dead, at the child whose skin had turned to stone. David saw fear in their eyes, and he pressed that advantage with savage glee. He walked to the edge of the abyss and picked up the warlord's skull mask. He held it high so all could see, then dropped it over the edge. It tumbled end over end, disappearing into the mist. David's voice was a growl that cut through the wind. "The abyss has its sacrifice. Who wants to join him?" The fear that had been building in the cleaner's eyes turned to terror. To them, David was no longer human. He was a demon, a monster that could not be killed. And the child beside him was worse, a thing that turned flesh to stone with a thought. They were facing creatures from nightmare. The cleaners broke. They backed away slowly at first, then faster, and finally they turned and ran, disappearing into the jungle like ghosts. David watched them go and said nothing. He knew they would tell their story, and the story would grow with each telling. By the time it reached the settlement, he would be 10 feet tall, and Amina would be a goddess of stone. It did not matter. They were alive. The wind died down as suddenly as it had risen. David sat heavily on the boulder, his back against the stone. His hands shook as he tore strips from his shirt to bind his wounds. The leg was bad. He would be lucky if he could walk tomorrow. Emina sat beside him, her legs dangling over the edge of the abyss. She no longer feared the drop. She had looked into the face of death and walked away. "Where will we go?" Emina asked quietly. "I cannot return home." David tied off the bandage on his thigh with his teeth and considered the question. Home. He had not had a home in so long he barely remembered what the word meant. The settlement would kill him on sight now. He had broken the most sacred of contracts, had murdered their warriors, had defied their elders. He was an exile, and Amina was an exile beside him. He looked across the canyon to the far side, where the land stretched wild and untamed. No settlements there, no elders, no laws but the law of survival. It would be hard, it would probably kill them, but they would be free. "We have no home," David said. He wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand. "But we have a road. He stood, moving carefully to avoid putting weight on his injured leg. He extended his huge hand to the small girl sitting beside him. Amina looked at his hand for a long moment, then placed her small blue palm in his. Her hand disappeared in his grip, but she held on tight. Two silhouettes stood against the enormous red sun setting behind the canyon's rim. A man and a child, scarred and broken, but unbowed. They began to walk along the cliff edge, searching for a path down and across. Together against the world, together into the unknown. They walked until the sun was nothing but a memory of fire on the horizon, and the stars began to appear in the alien sky. David's leg throbbed with each step, but he did not slow. Amina kept pace beside him, her small hand still holding his. Behind them, the abyss whispered secrets to the wind. Ahead of them lay a world without mercy, without pity, without forgiveness. But they had something the world did not. They had each other. And sometimes in the wild places where civilization feared to tread, that was enough. The path descended sharply, switchbacking down the canyon wall in a series of narrow ledges. In places, the rock had crumbled away, forcing them to edge along sections barely wider than David's shoulders. Amina moved with the confidence of youth, while David had to fight against vertigo and the weakness in his leg. One misstep would send them tumbling into the void. As night deepened, they found a shallow cave carved into the canyon wall, barely deep enough to shield them from the wind, but better than nothing. David collapsed against the back wall, his breathing ragged. The wounds had stopped bleeding, but the pain was getting worse, not better. Infection was a real possibility. Out here, far from any medicine, infection meant death. Amina sat at the cave mouth, watching the stars. She had never been this far from the settlement. She had never slept under open sky. Part of her was terrified, but another part, a part she had not known existed, felt something like freedom. No one was telling her to hide, to keep her head down, to be ashamed of what she was. The human beside her had seen what she could do, and he had not been disgusted. He had called her a weapon. She did not fully understand what that meant, but she thought perhaps it meant she had value. "Tell me," she said without turning around. "Why did they hate me? What did I do wrong?" David closed his eyes. This was a question he could not answer. Not really. How do you explain to a child that people fear what they do not understand? That difference is seen as threat. That those who cannot be controlled must be destroyed. How do you explain that the world is not fair? That justice is a luxury? That survival often means becoming the thing you fear? "You did nothing wrong," he said finally. "They are afraid. Fear makes people cruel." "Are you afraid of me?" David opened his eyes and looked at her small silhouette against the stars. "Yes," he said honestly. "I am afraid of what you might become, but I am more afraid of what they would have made you, or what they would have made you into if they had killed that part of you that makes you strong." Amina turned to look at him. "I do not understand." "You will," David said. "Someday you will." They slept in shifts, David taking the first watch despite his wounds. He sat with his machete across his knees and listened to the night sounds of the canyon. Strange things lived down here in the depths, things that had evolved in isolation, away from the surface world. He heard skittering sounds on the rocks above, saw shadows moving against the star-filled sky. But nothing approached the cave. Perhaps even the predators of the abyss knew to avoid things that smelled of blood and desperation. Morning came with a blaze of color, the rising sun painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. They ate the last of the stone lion meat, now stale and tough, and continued their descent. The path became treacherous, in places barely a crack in the rock face. David had to lower Amina down by her arms, his muscles screaming with the effort, before dropping down himself. By afternoon, they had reached a ledge wide enough to rest. David sat heavily, his face gray. The wound in his thigh had reopened during the climb, and fresh blood soaked through the bandages. Amina looked at him with worry but said nothing. What could she say? They had no medicine, no supplies. All they could do was keep moving and hope that David's body was strong enough to fight off infection. "We need water," David said. His voice was hoarse. "Listen." Amina tilted her head. At first she heard only the wind, but then she caught it, a faint rushing sound echoing off the canyon walls. Water. Somewhere below them, a river ran through the abyss. They found it 2 hours later, a wide stream that cut through the canyon floor, its water clear and cold. David collapsed beside it and dunked his head under the surface, drinking deeply. Emina did the same, the cold water shocking after the heat of the climb. They rested on the rocky shore, too exhausted to move further. Something moved in the water. David's hand went to his machete, but what surfaced was not a predator. It was a fish, easily 2 meters long, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. The fish regarded them with large, intelligent eyes, then dove back under the surface and was gone. "Everything here is strange," Emina said softly. "Strange does not mean hostile," David replied. "Remember that." They followed the river downstream as it carved its way deeper into the canyon. The walls rose on either side, towering monoliths of stone that blocked out the sky. In places, the river narrowed to a fierce rapids, and they had to climb the walls to bypass the dangerous water. In other places, it widened into deep pools where things lurked in the depths, their forms visible only as dark shapes against the lighter sand of the bottom. On the third day after leaving the canyon rim, they found the bridge. It was not a natural formation, but something built, an arch of stone blocks fitted together with precision that spoke of intelligence and purpose. The bridge spanned the river at its narrowest point, leading to a tunnel carved into the far wall. David approached the bridge cautiously. The stones were weathered but intact, covered in carvings that might have been writing or might have been decorative. He had no way to read them. He stepped onto the bridge, testing his weight. The stone held firm. "Who built this?" Emina asked, her voice echoing off the walls. "Someone who is not here anymore," David said. "This place is old, is very old." They crossed the bridge and entered the tunnel. It was wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast, the floor smooth and level. Every few meters, openings in the walls let in shafts of light from above, illuminating patches of the tunnel while leaving the rest in shadow. David kept one hand on his machete and the other on Amina's shoulder, guiding her forward. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber carved from living rock. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness, and the walls were covered in more of the strange carvings. In the center of the chamber stood the remains of what might have been a settlement, stone structures reduced to rubble by time and neglect. No one had lived here for centuries, maybe millennia. "What was this place?" Emina whispered. David shook his head. He had no answers. This world was not his world. Its history was not his history. All he knew was survival. They made camp in one of the ruined structures, a building with 3 walls still standing and enough of a roof remaining to provide shelter. David's fever had broken during the walk, and the wounds, while painful, showed no signs of infection. His body, toughened by years of hardship, was winning the battle against injury. Emina explored the ruins while David rested, her curiosity overcoming her fear. She found pottery shards, tools made from stone and bone, the skeleton of something that might have been a child of the builders. The bones were small and delicate, the skull elongated in a way that reminded her of her own people. Perhaps they had been related, distantly. Perhaps they had been something else entirely. As the sun set and darkness filled the chamber, Emina returned to David with her prize, a small figurine carved from dark stone. It depicted a creature with 4 arms and a single eye in the center of its forehead. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect. "Can I keep it?" she asked. David looked at the figurine, then at her hopeful face. "It is yours," he said. "You found it." Emina clutched the figurine to her chest and smiled, the first real smile David had seen from her. It made her look younger, more like the child she was supposed to be. It made something in David's chest tighten with an emotion he could not name. They left the ruins the next morning, following a passage that led upward through the rock. The climb was long and arduous, but eventually they emerged on the far side of the canyon, blinking in the bright sunlight. Behind them, the abyss cut across the landscape like a scar. Ahead of them stretched wilderness, an expanse of blue-green vegetation broken by rocky outcroppings and distant mountains. David stood looking out at the new land, and for the first time in years he felt something like hope. It was a small thing, fragile as glass, but it was there. They had survived the canyon. They had survived the cleaners. They had survived each other. Perhaps that meant something. Where do we go now? Amina asked, standing beside him. David pointed toward the mountains. There. Mountains mean caves, water, game to hunt. We can survive there. For how long? As long as we need to. They walked into the wilderness together, leaving the canyon and everything that had happened there behind them. The sun was warm on their faces, and the wind carried the scent of growing things. Somewhere ahead there would be new dangers, new challenges, new reasons to fight or to run. But for now, in this moment, they were alive and free. And that was enough. The wilderness proved to be as unforgiving as everything else on this world. They walked for days through terrain that shifted from jungle to grassland to rocky desert and back again. The weather was unpredictable, swinging from scorching heat to freezing cold within hours. They learned to read the signs to find shelter before the storms hit, to avoid the predators that hunted by day and the different predators that hunted by night. David taught Amina how to move quietly through the brush, how to track game by their spoor, how to find water even when none seemed present. She learned quickly, her young mind soaking up knowledge like a sponge. In return, she taught him things about the local flora, which plants were safe to eat and which would kill, knowledge passed down through generations of her people. They spoke little, but a bond was forming between them, forged in survival and mutual dependence. David found himself caring whether Amina lived or died, and that terrified him. Caring meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant weakness. He had spent years training himself not to care, and now this small blue-skinned girl had undone all of that in the space of a week. One night, as they sat around their fire, Amina spoke. David, what will happen if we meet other people? Other settlements? David poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. We avoid them. People bring complications. But we are people too. We are survivors. There is a difference. Amina was quiet for a moment, then asked, will you always protect me? The question hung in the air between them. David did not answer immediately. To say yes would be a promise, and promises could be broken. To say no would be a betrayal of something unspoken that had grown between them. Finally, he spoke. I will protect you as long as I can, but you must learn to protect yourself. I am getting old, Amina. Someday I will not be here. Then teach me, she said with sudden fierceness. Teach me to fight. David looked at her across the flames, at her small body and determined face, and he nodded slowly. Tomorrow. We start tomorrow. The training was brutal. David did not believe in going easy, not even on a child. He taught her how to hold a knife properly, how to cut and thrust and parry. He taught her footwork, balance, how to use her small size as an advantage against larger opponents. He taught her that fighting was not about honor or glory. It was about survival, about doing whatever it took to walk away alive. Amina bore the training without complaint. She fell, she got bruised, she bled from a dozen small cuts, but she always got back up, and slowly, day by day, she began to improve. Her movements became more fluid, her strikes more confident. David watched her progress with something that might have been pride. They reached the mountains 3 weeks after leaving the canyon. The peaks towered above them, their summits lost in clouds. The air was thin here, cold even during the day. They found a cave system that ran deep into the rock, with multiple chambers and a spring of fresh water. It would make a good base, a place to rest and recover before deciding their next move. David's wounds had healed to pink scars, adding to his collection. Amina had grown lean and hard from the journey, her baby fat burned away by exertion and sparse rations. They were not the same people who had left the canyon. The journey had changed them, forged them into something new. On their first night in the mountain caves, they sat around a fire and ate roasted rabbit that David had snared. The meat was tough but filling. Amina carved at it with a small knife David had made for her, and he noticed with approval that she held it correctly now, the way he had taught her. David, she said suddenly, do you miss your home, your world? It was a question she had never asked before, and David was surprised by it. Did he miss Earth? He tried to remember what it had been like, the cities and crowds, the technology and comfort, the rules and laws that governed every aspect of life. He had been someone different there, someone with a name and a history, someone who fit into society's neat categories. No, he said finally, I do not miss it, That place, that person I was there, he is dead. This is my home now. This is who I am now. Are you happy? The question was innocent but profound. David thought about it, really thought about it. Was he happy? He was cold, hungry, scarred, and hunted. He had no possessions except his weapons and the clothes on his back. Every day was a struggle to survive. By any reasonable measure, his life was terrible. But he was free. For the first time in his life, he was truly free. No one told him what to do, where to go, what to think. He made his own choices and lived with the consequences. And he had Amina, this strange, fierce, wonderful child who had somehow become the closest thing to family he had ever known. Yes, he said, surprising himself with the answer. I think I am. Amina smiled and returned to her food, satisfied with the answer. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them, the wind howling outside the cave. Two survivors in a hostile world, finding something like peace in the midst of chaos. The peace did not last, it never did. They had been in the mountains for 2 days when the hunters found them. Not cleaners from the settlement, but something worse. Raiders. They were a mixed group, David saw as he peered from the cave entrance. Several species working together. There were blue-skinned aliens like Amina's people, but also red-skinned giants and something that looked like a cross between a reptile and an insect. They were armed with spears, clubs, and crude swords. Not sophisticated, but numerous. David counted 15 of them. We need to run, David said, already gathering their meager supplies. But Amina was looking at the raiders with an expression David had never seen on her face before. It was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of fear. The child was gone, replaced by something harder. No, she said. We fight. Amina, there are too many. We cannot win. You taught me that fighting is not about winning. It is about surviving. She picked up her knife and walked toward the cave entrance. And I am tired of running. David cursed under his breath, but followed her. The raiders had spotted them now, were spreading out to surround the cave entrance. Their leader, one of the red-skinned giants, stepped forward with a grin that showed far too many teeth. What have we here? The giant rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. A human in a stone skin, worth good money as slaves. Surrender and we will not hurt you. Much. David said nothing. He simply drew his machete and stepped in front of Amina. The message was clear. You will have to go through me. The giant's grin faded. Have it your way, human. Kill the man. Take the girl alive. They came in a rush, a wave of bodies and weapons. David met them with his machete swinging, cutting through spear shafts and into flesh. Beside him, Amina moved like lightning, her small size making her hard to hit. She ducked under a club swing and drove her knife into a raider's knee, bringing him down. Her skin flickered between normal and stone hard as blows glanced off her, the adaptation happening faster now, more controlled. But there were too many. For every raider they brought down, 2 more took his place. David felt his arms growing heavy, his movements slowing. A spear point grazed his side. A club hit his shoulder, numbing his arm. He stumbled backward, and the raiders pressed their advantage. Then Amina did something David had not seen before. She stood still, closed her eyes, and her entire body turned to stone. Not just patches, but all of her, from head to toe. She became a statue of dark blue granite. A raider swung his club at her head with full force. The club shattered on impact, splinters flying everywhere. The raider stared at his broken weapon in disbelief. Amina opened her eyes. They glowed with an inner light, like lamps behind colored glass. She moved, and though her body was stone, she moved with terrible grace. She grabbed a raider by the arm and squeezed. Bone cracked like dry wood. The raider screamed. She threw him aside like he weighed nothing, and he crashed into 2 of his companions, sending them tumbling. The raiders fell back, frightened now. The stone skin was supposed to be a child, easy prey. But this was a monster, something that could not be hurt, could not be stopped. Their leader, the red giant, roared in rage and charged forward with his massive sword raised high. David intercepted him, his machete meeting the giant's blade with a shower of sparks. They traded blows, the giant's strength against David's skill. The giant forced David back, step by step. his sheer power overwhelming. David's arms screamed with the effort of blocking the heavy strikes. One blow got through, the flat of the blade hitting David's chest and sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. The giant raised his sword for the killing blow. Amina, still in her stone form, ran forward and jumped, tackling the giant around the waist. Even his enormous strength could not stop her momentum. They both went down, rolling in the dirt. Amina ended up on top, and she raised her stone fist and brought it down on the giant's face like a hammer. Once, twice, 3 times. The giant stopped moving. The remaining raiders broke and ran, scrambling down the mountainside in their haste to escape the stone demon. Amina stood over the fallen giant, her chest heaving with exertion. Slowly her skin returned to normal, the stone receding like a tide going out. She looked down at her hands at the blue blood that covered them, and something in her expression broke. She was a child again, a child who had just killed. David pulled himself to his feet, ignoring his screaming ribs. He walked to Amina and placed a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then turned and buried her face in his chest, her small body shaking with sobs. David held her awkwardly, unsure what to do or say. He was not good at comfort. He was good at violence and survival. But he held her anyway, and eventually her sobs quieted. "I killed him," she whispered. "I killed a person." "Yes," David said, because there was no point in lying. "You did, and it will not be the last time. Not if you want to survive in this world. Does it get easier?" David thought about all the lives he had taken, all the blood on his hands. "No," he said honestly. "It gets familiar, but it never gets easy. Not if you want to remain human." They left the mountains the next day. The cave was compromised now, and where one group of raiders had found them, others would follow. They traveled east, toward lands David had never explored, always moving, never settling. They learned to read the terrain, to anticipate danger, to survive on wits and skill when strength alone was not enough. Weeks turned into months. Amina grew taller, stronger, more confident. She learned to hunt with bow and spear, to track game across any terrain, to fight with knife and improvised weapons. David taught her everything he knew, all the hard lessons bought with blood and pain. She absorbed it all with the single-minded focus of someone who understood that survival was not optional. They encountered other travelers sometimes, other outcasts and exiles scratching out a living in the wilderness. Some were friendly, willing to trade information or supplies. Others were hostile, viewing them as competition for scarce resources. David and Amina learned to judge quickly which was which and to act accordingly. They made no friends but earned a measure of respect. Stories began to circulate about the scarred human and the stone-skinned girl, about how they had defeated an entire war party of cleaners at the Great Canyon, about how they had killed a raider giant with their bare hands. The stories were exaggerated, but neither David nor Amina bothered to correct them. Reputation could be as useful as a weapon. One evening, nearly 6 months after leaving the canyon, they came across a small settlement built into the ruins of an ancient structure. It was a mixed community, several species living together in relative peace. They approached cautiously, hands near their weapons, but the sentries at the gate seemed more curious than hostile. "What is your business?" one of the guards asked. She was blue-skinned like Amina, but taller, older, with ritual scars on her face and arms. "We are travelers," David said. "We seek only to trade for supplies and information. Then we will be on our way." The guard studied them for a long moment, her eyes lingering on David's scarred face and Amina's hard gaze. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. She stepped aside and gestured toward the gate. "Trade is allowed, but keep your weapons sheathed and cause no trouble. We have little patience for violence within our walls." They entered the settlement and found it surprisingly organized. There was a central square where traders set up their wares, a communal well, even what looked like a school where children of various species sat learning together. It was not paradise, but it was a functioning community, people of different backgrounds working together for mutual survival. David traded some of the raider weapons they had collected for dried meat, salt, and a new water flask. Amina wandered the square, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen so many people in one place who were not trying to kill her. Children played in the streets, laughing and chasing each other. It looked almost normal, almost like a real life. An old woman approached them as they prepared to leave. She was of a species David did not recognize, with skin like weathered bark and eyes that held ancient wisdom. She looked at Amina for a long moment, then nodded as if confirming something. "Stone skin," the old woman said. It was not a question. "You are the one from the stories, the child who was thrown away." Amina stiffened but did not respond. David's hand moved to his machete. The old woman raised her hands in a placating gesture. "Peace, warrior. I mean no harm. I only wish to tell the child something." She turned her attention back to Amina. "You are not cursed, young one. You are gifted. There are others like you in the world, others who can change their flesh, who are more than simple flesh and bone. They are feared because they are powerful, and power threatens those who have little of it." "Where are these others?" Amina asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Scattered, hidden, surviving as you survive. Perhaps someday you will find them. Perhaps they will find you. But know this, you are not alone. You were never alone, even when they made you believe you were." The old woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before Amina could ask any more questions. David and Amina left the settlement shortly after, but the old woman's words stayed with them. That night, camped under the stars, Amina spoke. "Do you think she was telling the truth? That there are others like me?" David fed wood to the fire. "I do not know, but it does not matter. Even if you are the only one of your kind, you are not alone. You have me." Amina smiled. "And you have me." "Yes," David agreed. "I have you." They sat in companionable silence, watching the alien constellations wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, beyond the firelight, was a vast and dangerous world. But here, in this moment, they had each other. And that, David reflected, was more than he had ever hoped for. The seasons changed as they traveled. The vegetation shifted from blue-green to deep purple, and the air grew colder as they moved north. They crossed frozen rivers and climbed mountains, whose peaks were sharp as knife blades. They learned to read weather patterns in the strange sky, to predict storms hours before they hit, to find shelter in places that looked barren but held hidden caves and overhangs. Amina turned 9, then 10. She grew lean and hard, all angles and muscle, her childhood's softness burned away by constant travel and training. David taught her to use a bow, crafting one from springy wood and sinew. She practiced for hours each day until her fingers bled, then practiced more. By the time she turned 11, she could hit a target at 50 paces, could bring down game on the run, could put an arrow through an eye socket if she needed to. David aged too. The gray in his hair spread, and new lines appeared on his face. His body, though still strong, began to betray him in small ways. His knee ached in cold weather. His shoulder, broken years ago and never properly healed, protested when he swung his machete. He did not mention these things to Amina, but she noticed. She saw how he moved more carefully in the mornings, how he sometimes grimaced when he thought she was not looking. They came upon a valley sheltered by mountains on 3 sides. A river ran through it, fast and clear, teeming with fish. The land was fertile, covered in edible plants and populated by herds of grazing animals that looked like 6-legged deer. It was as close to paradise as anything on this brutal world could be. "We could stay," Amina said as they stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. "Build something here, a home." David looked at the valley and felt the temptation. He was tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of watching his back every moment of every day. A home. The word sounded strange in his mind, like a language he had almost forgotten. But he knew the truth. There was no home for people like them. There was only movement, only survival, only the next day and the day after that. "For a while," he said finally. "We can stay for a while." They built a shelter at the edge of the valley where the forest met the grassland. It was not much, just a lean-to made from branches and animal hides, but it was theirs. They dug a fire pit lined with stones and built racks for drying meat and fish. David showed Amina how to set snares and traps, how to preserve food for lean times, how to live off the land without depleting it. For 3 months, they lived in something approaching peace. They hunted and fished and gathered. Emina practiced her bow and knife work. David repaired their gear and made new weapons from materials they found in the valley. At night, they sat by the fire, and David told her stories about Earth, about cities made of metal and glass, about machines that could fly through the air, about oceans vast enough to swallow this entire valley 1,000 times over. Emina listened with wide eyes, trying to imagine a world so different from the one she knew. "Why did you leave?" she asked one night. David stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "I did not leave. I was taken. I was a soldier, fighting in a war that nobody could win. My unit was captured during a raid, and instead of killing us, they sold us. Slavers. They shipped us off-world to work in mines and factories, wherever bodies were needed and lives were cheap. I escaped during transit, ended up on this rock, and I have been here ever since. Do you want to go back?" "No, there is nothing for me there. That life, that person, he died a long time ago. This is who I am now." Emina nodded, satisfied. She understood about dying and being reborn. She had died in that sack, died when her people threw her away. The girl who came out was someone different, someone harder. The piece ended on a morning when the sky was painted red by dawn. David woke to the sound of hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast. He grabbed his machete and burst from the shelter to see riders cresting the ridge, at least 20 of them mounted on creatures that looked like wolves crossed with horses. The riders were blue-skinned, but not like Amina's people. These were different, taller and broader, with features that suggested a different tribe, or perhaps a different subspecies entirely. "Emina, get your bow! Now!" She rolled out of the shelter, already armed, and nocked an arrow. The riders spread out as they descended into the valley, forming a loose line. They carried spears and axes, and their faces were painted with war symbols. This was not a scouting party. This was a raiding force. The leader, a woman with a shaved head and a necklace made from teeth, rode forward until she was within shouting distance. "You camp on land claimed by the Windrunner clan. You hunt our game, drink our water, live under our sky. This is theft. The penalty is death or service. Choose." David stepped forward, his machete held loosely at his side. "We knew nothing of your claim. We will leave today. There is no need for blood." The woman laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "You think you can simply walk away? You have eaten our food for months. You owe a debt. The debt will be paid." "Name your price." "The girl. She will serve the clan until the debt is satisfied. You may go free." David felt something cold settle in his chest. "No." "Then you both die, here, now." The woman raised her spear and the riders charged. David and Emina ran, not toward their shelter, but toward the river. It was their only chance. The riders would be slowed by the water, would have to dismount to follow them across. It might give them time to reach the forest on the far side. They hit the water at full speed. The current was strong, trying to sweep them downstream, but they had crossed it dozens of times and knew the safe path. Behind them, the riders reached the bank and stopped. Some dismounted, preparing to follow on foot. Others circled, looking for a ford. David and Emina reached the far bank and scrambled up the muddy slope. Arrows hissed past them, striking trees and stones. One grazed David's shoulder, cutting a line of fire across his skin. They plunged into the forest and ran. The forest was dense, choked with undergrowth that tore at their clothes and skin. They could hear the riders behind them, crashing through the brush, shouting to each other. David led them deeper into the trees, using every trick he knew to lose their pursuers. They waded through streams to break their scent trail, climbed over rocks to hide their footprints, doubled back on their path to confuse trackers. By nightfall, they had lost the immediate pursuit, but they knew the riders would not give up. The Windrunner clan had been insulted, and they would hunt David and Emina until they caught them or until something else killed them first. They moved through the night, not daring to stop, not daring to light a fire. Amina's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she did not complain. She simply kept putting one foot in front of the other, following David through the darkness. When dawn came, they found themselves in a rocky badland, all broken stone and scrub vegetation. It was terrible ground for tracking, but also terrible for travel. Every step was an effort, every rock a potential twisted ankle. They rested in the shade of a boulder, sharing the last of their water. David's shoulder throbbed where the arrow had grazed him. The wound was shallow, but it needed cleaning. He had no supplies, no medicine, nothing but his blade and his will. "We cannot outrun them," Amina said. Her voice was steady despite her exhaustion. "They know these lands. We do not." "I know." "Then we need to stop running." David looked at her. She was 12 now, almost as tall as his shoulder, with eyes that had seen too much violence for her years. She was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. They needed to turn and fight, to make the Windrunner clan bleed so badly they would decide the pursuit was not worth the cost. "We need to choose the ground," David said. "Somewhere that favors us. Somewhere we can kill them in groups instead of facing them all at once." They found it by midday, a narrow canyon with walls too steep for the riding beasts. The canyon floor was littered with rocks and boulders, providing cover. One end opened onto the Badlands, but the other end narrowed to a crack barely wide enough for one person to pass through. It was a natural funnel, a killing ground. David and Amina spent the afternoon preparing. They gathered rocks and piled them where they could be used as weapons or rolled down on attackers. They set snares across the canyon floor, thin cords pulled tight at ankle height, almost invisible against the dusty ground. David sharpened his machete until the edge could split hairs. Amina checked her bowstring and counted her arrows. 23. Not enough, but it would have to do. They did not have to wait long. The Windrunner riders appeared at the canyon mouth as the sun began to set, their silhouettes dark against the orange sky. They saw David and Amina standing in the open, exposed and apparently defenseless. The lead rider, the woman with the tooth necklace, smiled in triumph. "Wise choice," she called out. "You cannot run forever. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." David's answer was to spit on the ground and raise his machete. The woman's smile vanished. "Kill them both." The riders charged into the canyon. The first 3 horses hit the snares simultaneously. The cords caught their legs, and they went down hard, throwing their riders. David and Amina moved. Amina's first arrow took a rider in the throat before he could stand. Her second arrow punched through a woman's eye. Her third, fourth, fifth arrows found targets with mechanical precision. She was not shooting warriors. She was harvesting meat. David met the riders who made it past the snares with his machete swinging. He used the narrow space to his advantage, forcing them to come at him 1 or 2 at a time. A spear thrust at his chest. He parried it aside and opened the wielder's belly. An axe came at his head. He ducked under it and hamstrung the attacker. Blood painted the canyon walls, bright blue in the dying light. The Windrunner clan had numbers but not discipline. They crowded into the canyon, getting in each other's way, unable to bring their weapons to bear effectively. David and Amina had planned for this, had counted on their enemy's arrogance. The riders had expected easy victims, not a coordinated ambush. Amina ran out of arrows. She dropped her bow and drew her knife, her skin flickering to stone as a rider grabbed for her. She drove the knife into his armpit where the armor did not cover, twisted it, ripped it free. The rider fell, choking on his own blood. Another came at her from behind. She spun, her stone-hard fist catching him in the temple. His skull cracked like an egg. David took a spear in the side. The point punched through his leather armor and grated against a rib. He roared in pain and rage, grabbed the spear shaft, and used it to pull the wielder close. His forehead smashed into the rider's nose. The rider staggered back, and David's machete took him across the throat. The woman with the tooth necklace watched her warriors die and understood. This was not a fight she could win. She turned her beast and fled, calling for a retreat. The surviving riders followed, scrambling over their dead in their haste to escape the killing ground. David stood among the corpses, breathing hard, blood running from the wound in his side. Amina came to him, her face and arms spattered with blue gore. She looked at the spear still embedded in his flesh, and her eyes widened. "We need to pull it out," she said. "Not yet. If we pull it now, I might bleed out. We need to get somewhere safe first." They left the canyon, moving as fast as David's injury allowed. Behind them, the canyon floor was a charnel house, bodies piled on top of each other, blood pooling in the dust. 20 warriors had entered the canyon. 8 came out. It was a victory, but it tasted like ash. They found a cave a kilometer from the canyon and barricaded the entrance with rocks. Only then did Amina help David remove the spear. He bit down on a leather strap as she pulled, the pain so intense he nearly passed out. Blood flowed freely from the wound. Amina packed it with moss and bound it tight with strips torn from her shirt. It was crude but effective. The bleeding slowed to a trickle. David lay back against the cave wall, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "We need to move again soon. The woman who escaped, she will bring reinforcements." "You cannot move, not like this." "I do not have a choice." But his body disagreed. Fever set in by morning, and with it came delirium. David thrashed and muttered, seeing things that were not there, fighting enemies long dead. Amina kept him as comfortable as she could, gave him water when he was lucid enough to drink, changed his bandages when they soaked through with blood and pus. She did not sleep. She could not. If she slept, David might die, and if David died, she would be alone. For 3 days, David burned with fever while Amina kept watch. She heard riders passing outside the cave, heard them calling to each other as they searched. She held her knife and prepared to sell her life dearly if they found them. But the riders moved on, and the cave remained undiscovered. On the 4th day, David's fever broke. He woke to find Amina asleep sitting up, her knife still clutched in her hand, her face gaunt from lack of food and rest. He reached out and touched her shoulder gently. She woke instantly, the knife coming up before she recognized him. "You came back," she said. Relief flooded her voice. "Did you doubt?" "Yes. You were dying. I could not stop it. I thought I would lose you." David sat up slowly, testing his body. He was weak, shaky, but the wound had stopped bleeding and showed no signs of infection. Amina's care had saved his life. "Thank you," he said. It was inadequate, but it was all he had. They left the cave when David was strong enough to walk. They traveled east, always east, leaving the Windrunner clan's territory far behind. The land changed again, becoming marshy and humid, full of standing water and twisted trees whose roots formed natural bridges and platforms. It was treacherous ground, full of predators both large and small, but it was also rich with life. They ate well for the first time in weeks. They came upon a figure sitting beside a stagnant pool, fishing with a crude pole. He was human, the first human besides David that Amina had ever seen. He was young, perhaps 20 years old, with dark skin and a shaved head. He did not reach for a weapon when they approached, just nodded as if he had been expecting them. "You are the ones," he said. His voice was soft, educated, strange to hear after so long in the wilderness. "The scarred man and the stone girl. Stories of you have spread far." "What do you want?" David asked, his hand near his machete. "To warn you, there is a gathering happening, 3 days' walk from here. Slavers, raiders, mercenaries, all manner of violent men. They are pooling resources to hunt you. The bounty on your heads is considerable." "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel. I was a slave once, owned by a merchant prince who bred humans for sport fighting. I escaped, much as you did. I live out here now, free but hunted. When I heard about you, about what you did at the canyon, I thought perhaps we might be allies." David studied the young man. He seemed sincere, but sincerity could be a mask. Trust was a luxury that often got you killed. Still, information had value, and Daniel had given them warning without asking for anything in return. "Why tell us this? What do you gain?" "The enemy of my enemy, as they say. The slavers hunt me as they hunt you. If you disrupt their gathering, weaken their numbers, I benefit, and perhaps if we survive, we might work together in the future. Strength in numbers and all that." David glanced at Amina. She shrugged, leaving the decision to him. He turned back to Daniel. "Tell us more about this gathering." Daniel told them everything he knew. The slavers were meeting at the ruins of an old fortress, a structure left by whatever ancient civilization had once inhabited this world. There would be at least 50 of them, maybe more, all armed and experienced fighters. They were planning a coordinated sweep of the region, using nets and hounds to drive prey toward waiting ambushes. They wanted David and Amina alive if possible, dead if necessary. The bounty was the same either way. "We cannot fight 50 warriors," Amina said after Daniel had left to return to his own hiding place. Even with surprise, we would be overwhelmed. We do not fight them, David said. We break them, divide them, make them fear each other more than they fear losing the bounty. They spent 2 days scouting the fortress. It was massive, far larger than any structure they had encountered before, with walls that still stood 20 meters high in places. The slavers had set up camp in the main courtyard, their tents arranged in rough circles around cooking fires. Guards patrolled the walls, but they were lazy, overconfident in their numbers. David and Amina struck at night. They crept through a breach in the wall and moved through the shadows like ghosts. Their first target was the weapon cache, spears and axes piled near the southern wall. Amina stood watch while David worked, splintering spear shafts, dulling axe blades with his knife, pouring dirt and sand into quivers to foul arrows. It was tedious work, but it would sow confusion when the fighting started. Their second target was the livestock. The slavers kept their riding beasts in a makeshift corral, 24 of the wolf horse creatures that the Windrunner clan favored. David opened the corral gate while Amina shot an arrow into the largest beast's hindquarters. The creature screamed and bolted, and the rest of the herd stampeded after it, crashing through the camp, trampling tents, sending slavers scrambling for cover. In the chaos, David and Amina struck. They moved through the camp like death itself, killing anyone too slow or too stupid to run. David's machete rose and fell, each swing taking a life. Amina's knife found throats and kidneys and the soft spots between ribs. They killed 6 before the slavers organized a defense, and by then, it was too late to stop the panic. The slavers split into factions, each group suspecting the others of betrayal. In the darkness and confusion, with their weapons sabotaged and their camp in ruins, they turned on each other. Accusations became arguments. Arguments became violence. By dawn, half of them were dead or wounded, and the other half had fled into the wilderness, more afraid of their former allies than of the bounty on David and Amina's heads. David and Amina watched from a hill as the last of the slavers abandoned the fortress. The plan had worked better than they had dared to hope. The slave-hunting coalition was broken, scattered to the winds, unlikely to reform anytime soon. "Where do we go now?" Amina asked. David looked toward the horizon. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Out there, beyond the marshes and the mountains, was more wilderness, more danger, more struggle, but also freedom, always freedom. "Wherever we want," he said. "We are done running from others. Now we go where we choose." They walked down from the hill and into the morning light, 2 figures against the vastness of the world. Behind them lay the ruins of the fortress, a testament to civilizations that had failed and fallen. Before them lay the unknown, full of threats but also possibilities. They walked side by side, warrior and warrior, father and daughter in all but blood, bound by survival and something deeper than words could express. The marshlands gave way to grasslands, and the grasslands to forests of trees with silver bark that sang in the wind. They met Daniel twice more over the following months, sharing information and supplies but never staying together long. Trust was still a rare commodity, friendship even rarer. But the seeds had been planted. Amina turned 13, then 14. She was tall now, nearly David's height, with the lean muscle of a predator. Her skill with bow and knife had reached a level that impressed even David. She could track game by broken grass and disturbed soil, could read weather in the color of the sky, could fight with a ferocity that frightened those who underestimated her because of her age. David turned 50. His hair was more gray than brown now, and his body carried new scars alongside the old. He moved slower than he once had, but his mind remained sharp, and his experience counted for more than youthful strength. He taught Amina everything he knew about tactics and strategy, about choosing battles and knowing when to walk away, about survival not just as a physical act, but as a way of thinking. They came upon a settlement built into the trees, rope bridges connecting platforms high above the forest floor. The inhabitants were a species David had never seen before, small and covered in fur like moss, with 4 arms and large luminous eyes. They watched David and Amina approach with curiosity rather than fear. The settlement leader, an ancient female whose fur had turned white with age, welcomed them with gestures in a language of clicks and whistles that David could not understand. But Amina did. She had always been better with languages, and she spoke to the leader in halting clicks, asking for shelter and offering to work in exchange. The leader agreed, and for the first time in 2 years, David and Amina slept under a roof that was not their own construction. The tree dwellers were gentle people, their lives centered around harvesting fruits and fungi that grew in the high canopy. They had no warriors, no weapons beyond tools. They survived through isolation and camouflage, hiding from the violent races that dominated the ground below. David and Amina stayed for a week, helping with repairs and maintenance that required larger hands and greater reach than the tree dwellers possessed. In return, they received food and rest and something like peace, but it could not last. They were not made for peace, not anymore. The quiet made them restless, made them watch the shadows for threats that were not there. On the 8th day, they thanked their hosts and left, descending to the forest floor and resuming their endless journey. The tree dwellers watched them go with sad eyes, understanding that some souls are too broken to ever fully rest. They traveled south as winter approached, seeking warmer lands. The weather grew worse, storms rolling across the sky with increasing frequency. One night, they took shelter in a cave only to discover it was already occupied. A woman sat by a small fire, human like Daniel, but older, perhaps 30 years. She had a scar that ran from her left eye to her jaw, and her hands were calloused from weapon work. She did not seem surprised to see them. "I wondered when we would meet. I am Eva. I have been tracking you for 3 months." David's hand moved to his machete, but Eva raised her hands in a peaceful gesture. "I am not here to collect a bounty. I am here to offer an alliance. Daniel sent me." "Daniel never mentioned you." "Daniel keeps his secrets, as do we all. But he trusts me, and he thinks we can help each other. There is a caravan coming through this region in 2 weeks, slavers transporting captured humans to the coastal markets. I plan to attack it, free the prisoners. I could use help." David and Amina exchanged looks. It was dangerous, reckless even. But it was also the right thing to do. And David had discovered that after years of doing wrong things for money, he actually cared about doing something right. "We will help," he said. Eva's plan was solid. The caravan would pass through a valley where the road ran between steep hills. She had 3 other fighters recruited, humans like herself who had escaped slavery and dedicated themselves to freeing others. With David and Amina, they would have 6 fighters against 20 guards. The odds were bad, but not impossible. They prepared for a week, scouting the route, identifying the best ambush points, planning their escape routes. Eva proved to be a competent leader, and her fighters were experienced and disciplined. David found himself respecting her, despite his natural caution around new people. The attack came at dawn. Eva and her fighters took the front of the caravan while David and Amina hit the rear. The first the guards knew of the ambush was when arrows started falling from the hills. David's machete cut through the chains securing the prison wagon, while Amina held off the guards with her bow. The prisoners, 15 humans of various ages, stumbled out into the chaos. "Run north," David shouted at them. "Into the hills! Go!" The prisoners ran. The guards tried to stop them, but Eva's team was cutting through their ranks, and David was a whirlwind of violence, his machete painting the ground with blood. The caravan master, a blue-skinned merchant with soft hands and cruel eyes, tried to flee on horseback. Amina's arrow took him in the spine, and he fell from his saddle screaming. They won. The guards were dead or fleeing, the prisoners were free, and the caravan's goods were scattered across the valley. Eva's team moved quickly, taking weapons and supplies before any reinforcements could arrive. They met up with the freed prisoners in the hills and led them to a safe location, a hidden camp where they could rest and decide their next moves. That night, sitting around a fire with Eva and her people, David felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he was part of something larger than himself, part of a cause that mattered. It was an unfamiliar sensation, both uncomfortable and strangely satisfying. "You fight well," Eva said to him. "Both of you. I could use people like you permanently. We could do real damage to the slave trade, save hundreds of lives." David looked at Amina. She was listening carefully, her expression thoughtful. They had spent so long running, fighting only for themselves, that the idea of fighting for others seemed foreign. But perhaps that was what they needed. Perhaps that was how they would find purpose in this brutal world. "We will think about it," David said. They stayed with Eva's group for a month, participating in 2 more raids, freeing more prisoners, making the slavers fear to travel certain routes. It was good work, important work, but David could see the cost. Eva's fighters were dedicated but traumatized, carrying wounds that went deeper than flesh. Many had been slaves themselves and carried that experience like a physical weight. One night, as David sat watch, Emina came to sit beside him. She was 15 now, almost fully grown, with the hard edge of someone who had seen too much death. "We cannot stay here forever," she said. "No, we cannot. But it feels good, helping people, making a difference." "It does." They were quiet for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Finally, Emina spoke again. "I want to find others like me." The old woman said there were more. "I want to know if she was telling the truth." David nodded. He had known this day would come, had known that Emina would eventually seek her own path. She was not a child anymore. She had not been a child for a long time. "Then we will look," he said, "together." They left Eva's group with her blessing and promises to return if they were ever needed. They traveled west, following rumors and whispers about others with strange abilities, about people who could change their flesh, who could survive wounds that would kill normal beings, who were feared and hunted for being different. The search took them across landscapes they had never seen, through territories claimed by a dozen different tribes and species. They fought when they had to, ran when they could, and slowly pieced together a picture of the world's scattered gifted ones. Most were dead, killed by their own people, or by hunters seeking to eliminate threats. But some survived, hidden in remote places, living in fear. They found their first one in a mining settlement at the edge of a volcanic field. Her name was Dinah, and she was 12 years old with red skin and the ability to generate intense heat from her hands. Her parents had sold her to the mine owners, who used her gift to forge metal and shape stone. She worked in chains, fed barely enough to survive, beaten when she showed any sign of resistance. David and Emina bought her freedom with the goods they had taken from slaver caravans. The mine owners took the payment and handed over Dinah's chains without a second thought. She was property to them, nothing more. Dinah did not speak for 3 days. She followed David and Emina silently, flinching at sudden movements, eating the food they gave her like she expected it to be snatched away. On the 4th day, as they sat around their campfire, she finally spoke. "Why did you save me?" Emina looked at her across the flames. "Because no one saved us. Because we know what it is like to be thrown away. Because you deserve better than chains." Dinah stared at her, then at David, trying to understand. Finally, she held out her hands, palms up. Heat shimmered in the air above them, and small flames danced across her skin without burning her. "They said I was cursed, dangerous, that I would kill someone if I was not controlled." "You are not cursed," David said firmly. "You are gifted. They feared you because they could not control you. That is their weakness, not yours." Dinah's flames guttered and died. She looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. Then she looked up at Emina with something that might have been hope. "Are there others? Others like us?" "Yes," Emina said, "and we are going to find them." They found the second gifted one 2 months later, a young man named Bennett who could make his bones grow outside his body, forming armor and weapons from his own skeleton. He lived as a pit fighter in a rough settlement, forced to battle wild animals for the entertainment of crowds. He was 19, scarred and bitter, with eyes that had given up on anything resembling freedom. David watched Bennett fight and saw potential. The young man was strong and skilled, but he fought without hope, just going through the motions until something finally killed him. After the fight, David and Emina approached Bennett's owner with an offer. They would fight in Bennett's place. If they won, Bennett went free. If they lost, the owner kept them all as fighters. The owner agreed, amused by their arrogance. David and Emina entered the pit together and faced a stone lion, the same type of creature that had once attacked them at the canyon. The crowd roared, expecting bloodshed and death. They got bloodshed, but not the kind they expected. David and Emina killed the stone lion in less than a minute, working together with the precision of people who had fought side by side for years. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the efficiency of the slaughter. The owner, a fat merchant with rings on every finger, honored the deal with obvious reluctance. Bennett was freed. He joined them without question, without asking where they were going or what they planned. He simply followed, and David did not mind. Bennett was damaged but not broken, and David understood that distinction. With time and purpose, he would heal. They all would. The four of them traveled together, a strange family bound not by blood, but by their difference from the normal world. They found two more gifted ones over the following months. Eileen, a girl of 10 who could change the color and texture of her skin to blend with any background, rescued from a merchant who had displayed her like a curiosity. And Aaron, a boy of 16 whose muscles could compress and explode with superhuman strength, freed from a military compound where he had been raised as a living weapon. 6 of them now. 6 gifted ones and 1 scarred human who had decided that their survival mattered more than his own safety. They moved through the wilderness like a pack, hunting to survive, fighting when necessary, and slowly building something that resembled trust. David knew he was slowing down. His body, pushed beyond its limits for years, was finally giving out. His hands shook sometimes and his vision blurred at the edges. He did not mention it to the others, but Amina knew. She always knew. She watched him with concern that she tried to hide, and David loved her for trying. One night, as they camped in a ravine, David called them all together. 6 young faces looked at him in the firelight, waiting for orders, waiting for guidance. He had become their leader without intending to, and now he had to prepare them for when he would no longer be there. You are strong, he told them, all of you. But strength is not enough. You need to be smart, to think ahead, to understand that survival is not just about winning fights. You need each other. Alone you will be hunted. Together you can survive anything this world throws at you. He taught them tactics and strategy, how to set ambushes, how to escape from traps, how to read terrain and weather, and the movements of other groups. He taught them to make weapons, to preserve food, to find water in places that look barren. He taught them everything he knew, pouring years of hard-won knowledge into their young minds, knowing that it might be all he could leave them. Emina understood what he was doing. One night, after the others had fallen asleep, she confronted him. You are preparing us for when you are gone. David did not deny it. I am old, Amina. I have lived longer than I had any right to expect. My body is failing. I need to know that you will survive after I am gone. You are not dying. Not yet. Not yet, but soon. And when that day comes, you need to be ready. You need to lead them. I cannot lead. I am not you. You are better than me. You are what I should have been. Strong without being cruel, hard without being heartless. They will follow you. They already do. Emina was quiet for a long time. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not want to lose you. I know, but you will not lose me, not really. I will be here in everything I taught you, in every choice you make, in every fight you win. I will be here. They sat together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, both knowing that time was running out, but neither willing to acknowledge it aloud. The moment was enough. It had to be enough.